So we're in the middle of our ecology unit, and it occurred to me that most of the videos and visuals and things that we do in ecology are from far off places like rainforests or deep oceans. And I realized that we have plenty of ecology right here on Long Island. So I'm going to take you on a walk through the woods near my house, and we're going to talk about ecology and some of the cool things that you can see if you go on walks in the forest by your house too. All right, so if we're going to study a place like this, the first thing we have to do is kind of organize it. We have to talk about some vocabulary. So we're going to start on a bigger scale, looking at this big area, and then work our way to a smaller scale, talking about individual organisms that are living around here. So on a bigger scale, I am in an ecosystem, and specifically I'm in a forest ecosystem. An ecosystem is all the living things around me, so these trees, all the little bugs in the soil, the chipmunks, the birds that are flying around me, all the living things, as well as all the non-living things, so the soil that I'm walking on, any of the rocks, the rain, the wind, lakes, rivers, any of that stuff, those are all non-living. So those two things together, the living and the non-living, make up what we call an ecosystem. As we work our way smaller, we work our way down, we can talk about a community. So community is only the living things. So the trees, the chipmunks, the birds, all the small plants, all the worms. Together we would say that's the forest community. Those are the living things that live in this forest. Smaller still, we could talk about a population. A population is a group of the same species. So I'm gonna start right here. If you look right here, right in front of me, is something called low bush blueberry. You can actually eat the berries off of here. They're tasty. And there is a bunch of them. So there's one plant here, there's another plant over here, another one over here. We could say that this is the low bush blueberry population. It's all one species and there's a bunch of them. This individual by itself would be an organism. It is a single low bush blueberry plant. So we go from ecosystem, which is all the living things and the non-living things together, down to community, which is just the living things in this area, to population, which is all of the same species, a group of the same species, and then all the way down to an organism, which is just a single individual living thing. All right, so behind me is a tree that has fallen down. This tree fell down a couple of weeks ago, and it fell down for two reasons. If we were to look at the center of this tree, in the middle of it, we'd see that bugs ate away at the middle and made the tree weak. So that was one reason. The second reason is that on the day this tree fell, there was a really, really strong windstorm. So there were two things that caused the tree to fall, the bugs and the wind. We have a living factor that caused this tree to fall down, and we have a non-living factor that caused this tree to fall down. And in ecology, we have words for those. A living factor would be called a biotic factor. So the bugs in that case are a biotic factor. And the non-living factor is an abiotic factor. When we put a in front of a word, it tends to make it the opposite of what we additionally intended. So the wind in this case, or the storm, would have been the abiotic factor that caused this tree to fall down. All right, so one of the ways that organisms survive in an environment like this is by hiding. And sometimes they're hiding in plain sight. So right behind me is actually one of the biggest organisms you'll find on Long Island. And it is right about there. You might see it moving around right now. It's a white-tailed deer. And even in a forest this big, we're not going to find too many of these white-tailed deer for a few reasons. The first is they're pretty good at hiding. Even though they're a really big organism, they blend in really well. Before I pointed it out, you may not have even seen that they were here. The other reason we don't see too many of them, because since they're such a big animal, they require a lot of food. And even though this forest is pretty big, it's not big enough to support a whole bunch of deer. So the most I ever seen here is maybe 6 or 7. So the most important abiotic factor for an organism to survive by far is water. And water is not always easy to find. In all of the woods that I'm hiking today, this is the only source of standing water. So organisms who rely on water, like frogs and salamanders, they have to be around here. Otherwise, they can't survive. Organisms that can move a little more, like the deer, okay, they're gonna have to stop here at some point and drink. There's so little water here that we say that water is a limiting factor. It limits how many organisms can survive. There can only be a certain number of deer because there's only so much water available for those deer to survive. Same for the frogs and the salamanders. In order for an ecosystem to persist, it needs a lot of energy. And most of the time, that energy comes from the sun. So I'm sitting here in front of an organism that is actually able to take that energy from the sun and turn it into real food. Okay? I can't do that. For as long as I'm laying out here in the sun, although the rays are warming me up, I'm never going to be able to take those sun rays and turn them into actual food for my body. But these organisms can. So here's an example right here. This is a dandelion plant. Dandelion is a French name. It actually means tooth of the lion, dent de lion. And most of us know it as a weed, which isn't really an ecological term. Weeds are just plants that grow very quickly. We tend to give plants that are annoying that name. But these guys don't annoy me. They actually serve a really, really important purpose. They're one of the earliest plants to come up in the spring, which means that all of the bugs and bees and things that are coming out of hibernation in the spring rely on these plants in order to eat food. So if we put pesticides down that kill these plants, or herbicides down that kill these plants, then those bees and bugs don't have a source of food during the springtime when there aren't really a lot of flowers available. I'm looking around right now and there are hardly any other flowers around. So these guys are really important. So plants in general are what we call producers. They're able to take energy from a non-living source like the sun and turn it into real life food for themselves. Like I said before, we can't do that. So in order for us to get that energy, we actually have to eat the plants. And that would make us consumers. We have producers who can make their own food, and then consumers like me and you who have to eat other organisms in order to get their energy.